Tēnā koutou katoa. Ata Mārie and welcome to our 9th online hui hosted by PANNZ and Auckland Live. Ko Delina wihi peihana tōku ingoa no Ngāti Tū Korehe me Ngāti Raukawa Ahau. Thank you for joining us this morning for our panel discussion on a call for change for the arts and for our world. I'll begin today with today's session with a karakia. Me karakia tātou. Tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e hui e, tāeki e. Kia ora anō and welcome. A big welcome to all of you who are watching on Facebook Live and YouTube this morning. Thank you for joining us. And a big welcome to those of you who may watch this at a later stage. I'm going to describe myself this morning. My name is Delina Wihipeihana. I'm a Māori woman. I have fair skin and black hair that sits just above my shoulders. Today I'm wearing pink lipstick and a flowery jacket, and I'm beaming in from my garden shed in Mount Eden this morning here in lockdown level 3. So behind me there are some pictures on the wall. I'm sitting in front of a couch and there is a white wooden door behind me also. Now at our session today, we are delighted to be joined by some fabulous panelists, and we're going to be talking about a call for change. The last few days have seen us return to lockdown level 3 in Auckland due to a second wave of COVID-19, and we do send our aroha and thoughts out to all of you, to those of you who may have had performances or workshops postponed or grant applications interrupted. Ka nui te aroha kia koutou. So the COVID-19 crisis is ongoing. It has taken a huge toll on our lives, our livelihoods, and our well-being. It's forced us to slow down, breathe, and consider the current state of the world and the environments in which we work and live. In our series of hui over the first lockdown period, a number of voices highlighted a desire for change and cautioned against a return to the status quo and business as usual. Today, we're talking with our panelists to ask, is a desire for change enough to affect real change? So we're delighted to have a panel this morning, including interdisciplinary artist and interim artistic director of Touch Compass, Paulina Keke Brown, the founder of Black Creatives Aotearoa and JK Productions, He Kōrero Ngā Tahi, Dione Joseph, and the founder of Track Zero Arts and Climate Change Action. We'd love to hear from you during the panel, so if you have any questions or comments for our panelists, please do enter them into the comments on YouTube and Facebook Live. And we have a team behind the scenes here who will collect those, and I can ask those directly to our panelists. So I'm very delighted to introduce our first panelist this morning. I'd like to welcome Paulina Keke Brown. Paulina Keke is an interdisciplinary artist. She was born in Aotearoa. She is of Samoan and Pākehā descent. She's a disabled artist whose work explores the overlaps and intersections between disability culture concepts and Samoan concepts. Recently, she has returned to Aotearoa after being based in New York City for 6 years to assume the role of interim artistic director of Touch Compass. She is the first disabled artist to lead the company in its 24-year history, and she's also one of its founding members. Paulina Keke attended the National Academy School of Fine Art Studio Intensive Program in New York and received a BA in English Literature and Pacific Studies, focusing on art and literature by Pacifica artists from Auckland University, New Zealand. And in her professional career, she has created projects with the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, Gibney Dance Centre and the Goethe Institute, and she was selected as one of 4 choreographers for Access Dance Company's 2020 Choreo Lab. Kia ora, Paulina Keke, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much, Delina. Thank you for that really warm welcome. And yeah, it's hard to listen to yourself when someone's introducing you so beautifully. Malo lava o le soifua la o ingoa o Paulina Keke de la Ulu Brown. I was born in Aotearoa. My mum is from Ngātai Vai and Sala'i Lua in Sava'i Samoa, and my dad is a Pākehā sixth generation New Zealander. I am light brown skinned, wahine. I have long brown wavy hair, and I'm wearing a pinstriped blue and white shirt, and I'm beaming in from Maunga Kea in my living room. So I'm sitting with some bay windows and then a beautiful stained glass window behind me. So thank you so much for having me. And this is such a timely hui, I think, during lockdown level 3, as Delina has said. It's something I've been really thinking about. How do we, what's this desire for change, and how can we actually live and breathe that kaupapa? So my life is directly impacted by COVID-19. I was based in Lenape-Hoking for the last 6.5 years, but I was in London when Trump closed the border between the UK and the US, so I couldn't return, and I'm on a visa, so I came back to Aotearoa and somehow kind of ended up in this role as interim artistic director at Touch Compass. And I think one of the reasons that I accepted this position was I really wanted to see that change happen. And I felt like in these times of crisis, having a disabled person of color in a leadership position, like what would that actually mean? So a lot of the kaupapa that Touch Compass is doing that we've been thinking about, excitingly, we've made a new kaupapa that's thinking about how do we embed disability concepts into the kaupapa of our artistic direction, but also into the organization. So a lot of the concepts that I've been thinking about in my artistic practice, so thinking about what does it mean to be disabled and the disability aesthetics. So disability aesthetics kind of thinks about the way that disabled people move, navigate, communicate. What is that aesthetic, and what does it mean in an artistic sense? That I've been thinking about embedding that into the new kaupapa, but also across the organization. So one of the concepts that my practice thinks about is crip time. So crip is a word that disabled people have reclaimed from the word cripple, and it's thinking about crip time, defined by Alison Kafer as thinking about how a disabled body moves and needs more time than in a capitalist world full of deadlines. So how do we embed crip time into an organization and into a kaupapa? So we have a disability equity statement in this new kaupapa that I'm quite excited by. And it's kind of stating that we're visioning to be an organization that does work in crip time, but it's actually really hard to work in crip time when you have all these other different structural industry, there's, all these deadlines around us. So thinking about that has been difficult. Like we have this new kaupapa, but actually in the industry, it's hard to live and breathe it. So I think that's why this conversation is really, really timely. And so some of the other work that I've also been doing in New York has been facilitating spaces for disabled people of color. So as most things, disability spaces are pretty Pākehā led. And so also thinking about how there's what's this intersection between race and disability, especially because disabled people are normally more impacted by, people of color are more impacted in disability through medical racism and things like that. So so that's kind of the kaupapa that I've been thinking about in some of the new visioning that we've been doing at Touch Compass. So thank you so much.
Kia ora, Paulina Keke, thank you. I'm really excited to have a discussion with you later, a little bit about crip time and also just those different hierarchies which are at odds with potentially the concept of time, but also the concept of a creative process, sometimes really driven by other factors. Makes it a real challenge to actually achieve sometimes what you want to achieve, especially as we are now back in this sense of, with COVID-19, of when are we actually going to be able to be doing what we were doing, put performances on. This concept of time is a really difficult one for us at the moment. Well, now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Dione Joseph. Dione is the founder of Black Creatives Aotearoa and co-founder of JK Productions He Kōrero Ngātahi. She is a writer, director, and dramaturg who prioritises developing works by Indigenous and people of colour creatives. She has worked in Australia, USA, Canada, the UK, China, Mexico, and across Aotearoa. Welcome, Dione. It's wonderful to have you with us this morning, and congratulations on launching your Blackout series yesterday on Facebook.
Kia ora, Delina. Kia ora e hoa mā, ko Dione Joseph Korata Rasa Hou. Thank you again, Delina, for that lovely warm welcome. My name is Dione Joseph. I'm a mixed race woman of Caribbean, French, Irish, and Anglo-Indian descent. I'm sitting in my kitchen with a fridge behind me. I'm wearing a light blue, well, actually it's a dark blue top with white splashes on it. And I've got curly black hair and I'm a brown-skinned woman. Again, thank you, Delina, for that lovely introduction. I'm really honored to be here, part of this kōrero. And I just wanted to start by saying, Keke, really acknowledge your kōrero about crip time and medical racism. I think there are two things that really intersect with the work of Black creators Aotearoa as well. Being able to work in ways that people don't often understand about what we need as people of color, and especially as Black people navigating a whole raft of different issues that might not be perceptible or perceivable to the majority of others. And similarly with the medical racism as well. After the COVID pandemic became apparent in New Zealand, and then the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, we saw a huge influx of microaggressions, a spike in racism, both in places such as waiting at A&E, to being at the march, to people's churches. And we're very fortunate that we have actually a private group called the BCA, Black Creators Aotearoa, a private group where our community can share and connect. But for those who don't know about BCA, Black Creators Aotearoa was started about 2.5 years ago, February 2018. And it came from a desire on my part to really create a safe space for our community, especially for our people of African and Afro-Caribbean whakapapa, to be able to connect, create, and collaborate across the motu, so across Aotearoa. One of the myths that exist is that we are not here. And this is a myth that has to be refuted time and time again. It takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of emotional labor. So to have a community and a space where we can share opportunities, whether they're for jobs or share resources and share support, has been hugely helpful for people who didn't often see themselves enough and have not seen themselves enough. We have been here documented since the 1950s. In fact, we recently found out that we actually had an Afro-Caribbean player in the All Blacks. Ranjith Wilson was one of the first and probably the only player of the All Blacks with Afro-Caribbean descent. And the West Indian and Caribbean Club has been in operation for almost 60 years. So we have been here, we are here, and we have been contributing to the economy, but we've consistently been faced with the idea that there aren't enough Black directors, writers, designers, playwrights. And this is an ongoing battle because people often seem to see that if you don't have the necessary qualifications, especially ones from a recognized institution, Aotearoa, then you may or may not be able to have access to those roles. So one of the privileges I have is to host a number of different events. So this year in February, we had the inaugural Untold Secrets, Hidden Gifts of Our Ancestors, which brought together 21 Black creatives. It had poets, photographers, and models. And we had this exhibition at Q Theatre who were very generous in providing us with space and an opportunity to be seen in the center of the city. And for the first time, and Sarah Graham, the artistic director of Q, told me this herself, they'd never seen so many Black people in Q Theatre, because this was a kind of event that was for the community. The theme of the exhibition had been co-curated and co-designed with me and the poets who were involved. And the conversations and the performances were all led by Black creatives. Similarly, last year we had the inaugural Black Creators Aotearoa Playwrights Lab, which saw 3 Black playwrights launch their works and develop it with other dramaturgs of color. We had Annette Morehu, Albert Bells, and Nathan Joe, our dramaturgs, and this year we're going to be doing the same. In fact, we're going to have 6 playwrights this time and 6 dramaturgs of color. We also have a huge emphasis on the fact that our community is the others. And by that, we don't just mean that we fall outside the Māori Pacific Asian spectrum of diversity. It also implies that we have trans Black people, we have mixed ability Black people, we have Black people who use binary fluid pronouns, and we have Black people who are raising children and who are deeply concerned about the offerings that the world can give them, especially when they're mixed race. We have a number of Black Māori and Black Pacifica and mixed Black community in New Zealand. And it's really important because they've been here for many generations, and being able to navigate your own indigeneity as well as your Blackness is a challenge when people often have associated Māori and Pacifica with Black without often knowing the full histories and the debt that we owe to certain words that we use so easily. Yesterday, as Delina mentioned, we launched our Blackout series. The Blackout series features 13 Black creatives over 13 weeks, hosted by Diane Wesh, who has been mentored by myself for the last 6 months. And she interviews a different Black creative every Sunday to talk about the effects of COVID and the lead up to the Black Lives Matter movement, anything else that might come up. And yesterday was really pertinent and wonderful because we opened with Alvi McCree. And Alvi is a Black Māori woman. She's Ngāpuhi and Ngāti Kahuki Whangaroa, as well as hailing from the Caribbean islands of Barbados. And she also was on the cover of Canvas a week ago, which was fantastic. And it was a moment in her story. And I'm deliberately using her story rather than his story, history in the making, because we have not been able to see and visualize and connect with that image in such a prominent way. Mainstream, and I often find this word quite hard, has its own silos. And I try and avoid using that term because I believe that everybody can change that narrative, and those other tributaries are just as powerful. If nothing else, we need to divert sources from the mainstream into those other tributaries of color so that we can truly revitalize the moana that we're all deeply connected to. As Caribbean people, we're surrounded by the water. And here in Aotearoa, as a person who came here when I was 14 years old, grew up in Aotearoa and has the pleasure and the privilege of, growing up in a Pacifica Māori community. I grew up in New Windsor, and we went to a church where we had a Māori choir, Samoan choir, and a Tongan choir. So it was a really easy way to learn Waiata because it was kind of the same song every Sunday in a different language. And being able to immerse myself into that corridor quite early on, and having parents who immediately told us when we arrived on this whenua that we are guests, we are manuhiri, and the first thing that we did was actually find our local marae, connect with the local iwi. And doing that as a person of mixed race and who has Indigenous heritage as well, enables you to understand your position and positioning in relationship to tangata whenua. And that's why I often say that Māori are not diverse, Māori are tangata whenua, and that our relationship as tō iwi, as manuhiri, is only because we are in that privileged position of being received with such great hospitality and manakitanga by tangata whenua and our brothers and sisters, our tangata Pacifica families as well. So all those different kaupapa intersect into my work. And while dramaturgy is quite a Eurocentric term, it is a huge part of what I do and what I've been able to do during lockdown, both of these lockdowns. I've also had a beautiful son during lockdown last time. I was level 3 and now we're level 3 again. And my son Pōwhare has been part of my journey during this last 12 weeks. He's been immersed in all my work and in our corridor. So he's definitely growing up as an arts baby. But the reason I bring him into the conversation is because even before he was born, I was also a stepmother to 3 other tamariki. And our children are hugely important to us, and being able to raise them in a world, I continuously do tell them that desire for change is simply not enough. That desire without motivation and commitment to action is not enough. Action on its own isn't enough either, but it's the motivation to keep it sustainable and consistent, especially as artists, because without being able to create sustainable careers, our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual well-being are all at stake. And so one of the things I've been especially teaching my elder to Hui and Kupe is the importance of learning to unlearn. It's something that comes up in their school quite a lot, that they haven't been given the skills to unlearn certain things and to learn how to learn how to ask the different questions, learn how to do differently. And it's really important because the skills that are being imparted continue to be part of an inherited institutionalized system that while on the surface they're part of a rumaki and it has a beautiful and holds Māori kaupapa really close, the school still faces a number of challenges and teachers still face a number of challenges. So how can we support the kayako? How can we support schools such as rumaki to really enable their students to question the system while still quite often participating in a system that doesn't always serve and doesn't always set our tamariki for the kind of success that is truly valuable to people of color, because that success doesn't simply look at monetary value. It looks at success in terms of spiritual health, looks at success in terms of community engagement and strong whānau support. And it looks at success in being able to leave behind no kind of necessarily financial or monetary legacy, but a legacy whereby the world has changed for the better. So I do tell all of my children that don't tell me what you want to be when you grow up, but tell me how you're going to change the world. And it's a bit of a tall order, as they say, but there's no place for, any kind of mediocrity really in our household. But, that's a joke and also an inherited institutional aspect of myself, so to which I also call myself out on. But that's a big korero. And again, just to talk what Delina said, a lot of aroha to all our whānau who've had shows close and grants interrupted, and who are reevaluating their notion of what time is. I think it's a really fantastic opportunity to understand what time and space mean during this particular lockdown. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Dione. Thank you very much for the wonderful thoughts you've shared there. Particularly struck by you saying that desire for change is not enough. I wrote down what you said. You said motivation, you need a motivation and a commitment to action and the ability to learn how to do differently. And I think that that's perhaps a challenge for all of us. We're working inside a system that perhaps we want to encourage ways for the system to change, but we're also having to face our own, conditioning as we go along that we perhaps also want to examine and change. As they say, change starts in the home, or change starts with yourself. So thank you for your thoughts, Dione, this morning, and congratulations on the arrival of your beautiful baby boy during the lockdown. That is an amazing feat. I'd now like to introduce our next panelist this morning, Sarah Meads. Sarah is the founder of Track Zero, the Arts and Climate Change organisation. Sarah has had many years of working at senior levels on sustainable development, climate change and international affairs. She is a former senior policy advisor to Oxfam New Zealand. Her focus is on working with others to design creative solutions and intergenerational frameworks that promote an inclusive, low emissions future and social justice. Sarah is passionate about engaging people on a visceral level to understand the impact of climate on people and the planet, harnessing the power of the arts to inspire climate action. Kia ora, Sarah, welcome.
Kia ora, and thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be with you and to share these different messages, and certainly what I'm wanting to share today will build on what the others have spoken about so far. First of all, I'm coming to you from Wellington, my home office space. I have medium length dark brown hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a blue sports top. I am Pakeha woman, and behind me in the space is some wooden shelving with a lot of colourful ceramics from both Aotearoa and overseas. I guess what really drives me, and I have a really deep belief in, is the power of arts and culture to create change from deep place within us. and really respond to some of the crises and the injustices that we are seeing around us at the moment. And that's why I set up Track Zero, which is about arts inspiring climate action. And what we do is we aim to create platforms to bring art, sciences and others, so it's truly multidisciplinary, to tell the climate story in ways people feel in their hearts and at an emotional level, rather than just understand in their minds, and in that way feel more engaged and empathetic to start being part of shaping a more inclusive, resilient future. And there are many ways arts and culture can do this, and we can certainly touch on that later. But one of these is using imagination and creativity for problem solving, and not just accepting current way we do things. And that touches back on, you know, learning to unthink and be open to new ideas. And Frances Whitehead referred to the fact that artists don't think outside the box. For them, there is no box. And that she found quite liberating in her own arts practice to expand her own field of inquiry and see that she could be or create space for more voices to be heard and different ways of thinking about the world around us, and whether in fact it's serving us and creating a better future for all. So what we do at Track Zero is we're really trying to create those platforms to support new artworks that are climate related, events, forum and applied research. And I guess some examples of what we've been doing so far. We're a couple of years old, a charity, and one of the current multi-year projects that we're running is called What If Climate Change Was Purple? And really the title is what you want to make of it, but it was for me, the concept means that if climate change was purple, the colour purple and surrounding us, it would become more tangible and we could feel more empowered to do something about it. And certainly in the climate change space, it's a global issue, but with many local impacts, and often we can feel disempowered to actually make change happen. So some examples of the projects within that multi-year program. We've got 7 new climate-related projects that are in research and development stage at the moment, and some of those started in the COVID lockdown, so they've had to be really persistent and passionate about working on their projects online and keeping an open mind about whether or not they need to go online completely with their final work, or whether in fact we'll be able to gather again with audiences around us in different spaces. So it's a multi-year project. James Renwick is a supporter of that. He's a climate scientist with some of his prize money from winning the Prime Minister's Science Communication Prize, and in partnership with Victoria University. And the 7 projects include work by people like Louise Potiki-Bryant, acclaimed Māori choreographer working with Paddy Free, Ariana Tiko, and they're working with mentorship from Daniel Hikaroa and Mike Joy, 2 scientists also part of the project. And her concept is around the change in rainfall and how that is going to be experienced differently by different communities, particularly in the South Island. And there are others, Tupua Tigafua, who is also an acclaimed choreographer, Pacifica background, working closely with David Long, who is a composer, and Tupe Lualua is producing that work. And that looks at how trees and forest ecology can help us mitigate climate change and how we need to reconnect with nature. And then a completely different piece of work that's being developed by Chris Adams. He's a composer, joining with Michaela Keeble, who's a poet and writer, and Jenny Rock, who's both a scientist and artist. And that is more orchestral work, and they're looking at how some of our native birds are now threatened because of the change in habitat from climate change and other factors, working with the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra and also with children. So there's quite a range, and that's the most exciting part of this project, bringing the artists and scientists together to co-create in ways that reach different audiences and speak to them in different ways, so that they feel more connected, find out more information, and start feeling part of a community that wants to see these, will care about creating a better future. I guess this connects back into the bigger picture, though, of COVID, and what I've been reflecting on in the past, since March, really, when COVID first struck globally, is the sorts of things that we've learnt from the lockdown that we can apply to all the other injustices and crises that are around us. And there were 5 things that really came to me. The first is community spirit and tapping into that, the fact that we feel more connected in New Zealand. We're a team of 5 million. The other one was, in New Zealand, we still are connected to our backyards. People started growing food, sharing it over their back fence to their neighbours and so on. So we still can connect with that way of being a bit more resilient than perhaps some other communities around the world can't still. We started listening to the science and the evidence of scientists, and that's the same in climate change. We've been talking about the changes and trajectories we're on in climate for some time, but somehow we haven't yet acted on that to the degree we need to and the urgency we need to. We've connected the fact that healthy communities can build healthy economies in our response to COVID. And finally, that power of collective action has come through. And I guess the fact that we are now in recovery mode as well, we're pouring money into the economy, creates a huge opportunity right now to reset and not go back to what was the normal. And in doing so, creating a better future for our children and their future generations. Otherwise, we run the risk of really borrowing from them and not addressing the issues that we should be today urgently. I think I'll leave it there and hand back to you, Delina.
Thank you, Sarah. I really enjoyed those 5 points that you've talked about there: the community spirit, backyards, listening to the science. Can I just ask you, because over this course of your project with Track Zero, Sarah, you've had many conversations with scientists. What has been perhaps one of the most important things that a scientist has said to you about climate change that hasn't necessarily depressed you, but has given you kind of hope?
Funny enough, recently I found this actually quite exhilarating. Some scientists actually believe there's huge opportunity, and from COVID we've seen this collective response and those elements I was talking about, and they actually feel more optimism than previously, because we really need widespread leadership from political through to communities, and we've seen that in good and bad in different countries coming to the fore in our response to COVID, because it's so much in front of us. And the thing with the climate response is it just seems overwhelming at times and intangible. But you can see how we're responding to COVID, and it's created a movement, and we're certainly suddenly galvanizing, industry sectors, the health sector and others very rapidly. And that's the sort of change we need to see for the climate response as well going forward. Also, working with scientists, they are very much kind of similar to the way artists work. Artists research, they reflect deeply on exploring things that are new, and they want to discover new things and then communicate them in ways that connect with people, and including the way people see the world. And there's a lot of similarities between the science and arts that actually the scientists and artists have both come up and expressed back to us. So it's really great to work across and collaborate, not in silos, but work across. We know that through research, that's the way of the future. We need to do more collaborative ways of working to solve big problems like COVID and like climate.
Thank you. Dione, you also talked about collaboration in terms of with Black creatives Aotearoa. One of your philosophies is to connect, create and collaborate. Out of this time of COVID-19, and then with the added dimension of the Black Lives Matter movement, coming out of the artists that you work with, what do you feel is the most urgent or important thing that they'd like to be addressed in their creative practice?
That's a big question, because so many different things come up for different people. When we had the first lockdown, we had something called Black Creatives during lockdown, and exploring their creative responses. And we spotlighted 10 different creatives to show what they were doing, whether they were doing online dance classes, whether they were creating new designs, whether they were writing new plays. And what we saw actually from our community was that they needed more. So we actually ran a second round of 10 Black creatives. So we featured all up 20 of them. And again, Diane wrote up the articles and I mentored her through it. But the common thing amongst all the creatives was to share their resources, to share their strengths, to share their talent and skill, and to see others using it. Because I think as artists, there's nothing more joyful and fulfilling than to seeing others on their path and supported towards a more joyous and more fulfilling career, whatever that may be. And for BCA, the idea of a creative is incredibly fluid and open. So we have creative entrepreneurs, we have hair braiders, we have poets and musicians and playwrights, we have makeup artists, we have filmmakers, but we also have healers and educators, because I strongly believe that every single person is creative. And often it's just going back to what we used to love doing as children and seeing where that desire is manifesting now. So the biggest thing for us as a creative community, as a Black creative community, is to continue to be able to share, and to be able to share again in ways that are meaningful, to share in ways that are resourced, and to share in ways that will continue to grow each other and the wider community.
Yeah, you
that way.
Only about representation and creating space and different types of events.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find there have been barriers to the ability for your artists to get their foot in the door, or have you found that creating your own space with Black creatives Aotearoa has sparked a different kind of momentum?
Absolutely. The reason why we had to create our own space, why I felt that we had to create the space, was because, and it's the same conversation I think Albie was having yesterday, is that Black people have always been Black people. Black people have always been, and they've never been able to take off the skin we're in, you know, we can't put it on and put it off. However, it's only very recently with, you know, the traction on the BLM movement that people have actually been interested in having a corridor, have actually wanted to understand different people's perspectives. And they might have known us for like decades, but it's only now that the sudden visibility of the markings of who we are and how that's different, because it's come under a worldwide microscope, has actually become part of the conversation. I've been championing for about 6 years since I came back home to Aotearoa after living in Australia for 6 years. Been championing for, you know, the policies to change. And I think that's hugely important. The policies around diversity continue to flummox me and frustrate me, especially with the diversity funding. It was heartbreaking to know that when the diversity funding first became available, that people of African, Caribbean, Latina, Middle Eastern descent weren't even invited to the table, let alone being able to participate in those projects. I also have concerns and questions when projects are greenlit and then not actually run or have people of the others, like Black people, in leadership roles. So when people of color, or in this case, Black creatives, are part of the ecology, but are only part of the substrata, down the rock bed, then how is this project actually enabled and to be successful at a level that actually supports the community and supports a growing ecology? So, for example, the Blackout series is run by an all-Black team. And for every single member on that team, it's the first time they're not just a token Black person in a project. They actually are with 6 other people who all can bring all of themselves. So yes, it's actually been hugely challenging to run Black creatives, and it started as a community organization, and because the community wanted, and when I say community organization, I should clarify, it started off as a group on Facebook, and it grew out of that. And got a website, and then we got a Facebook page, and got an Instagram, but none of it is funded. It's entirely funded out of my pocket. And I'm happy with that because I believe that that's valuable. And recently, and I'm super grateful, for the first time, Creative New Zealand gave us funding for the Blackout series. So, but it's taken 2.5 years to get to that point, and possibly, well over a decade for so many different people to champion for this change. And that's why Black Creators Aotearoa exists, because we're not an organization that has any particular mandate around social housing or community or health. We believe all those automatically get incorporated into our core purpose of serving people through our creativity, and we are nationwide. So for anybody who is listening and wants to support, it's resources, whether it's not just financial, but it's time and effort and energy. And as a community, we're severely under-resourced, but we are incredibly talented, incredibly willing to participate and contribute to the economy of Aotearoa, contribute to the well-being of the people of Aotearoa, and contribute to sustaining the whenua of Aotearoa, because that has born and bred and sustained the livelihoods of so many of our whānau.
Kia ora, Dione, thank you. That's a pretty clear guideline there. 2 things, really: resources to support something that's come from the community and that is led by that community, and also leadership. So that brings me over to talk to you, Pelina Keke, because you, within the organisation of Touch Compass and its 24-year history, fantastic appointment, so exciting. You're the first Pacific artist and first disabled artist to lead Touch Compass. Can you talk to us a little bit about having come into the role of interim artistic director of Touch Compass, of which you were a founding member, with your other experiences that you've had in the intervening years and on a global platform, but then to be working within this company at the time of COVID-19? How have you navigated this experience?
Kia ora, thank you, Delina. I want to tautoko a lot of the things that Dione just said. I was thinking about them in a disability justice lens. So there's a tenet of disability justice which says nothing about us without us. And so when you're talking about Black creatives, Black Aotearoa creatives, and having an all Black team, like that's something that I would love Touch Compass to do, to have a whole disabled artist team, but also the back end of the so Touch Compass is a performance company that works with disabled and non-disabled creatives, but I'd love it if it wasn't just the performers, like if we had a disabled lighting designer, or if we had a disabled producer or dramaturge, like, having those nuanced perspectives. Like, I'm one disabled person, but I don't own the perspective on disability, and I need other people. And that's why you need you need other people to have that experience. And so, yeah, I think, Delina, to answer your question, a lot of the experiences that I had in New York kind of really nurtured me and nourished me, and is one big reason why I wanted to come and take this role, because in New York there is a small but growing ecosystem of disabled artists, and they're performance artists, they're dancers, they're poets, they're visual artists. And so that was really exciting to be nurtured in that way. And so to come back to Aotearoa, I would love to see this like ecosystem of disabled artists and artistry. And you don't have to, in this disability equity statement that we have, I identify as disabled because for me, the word disabled, it's not a bad word. And it's also to kind of, it's a political, I think language is really important. So it's a political identity for me to come out and say, yes, I'm disabled, because a lot of people have a difficulty around language and those words. And so I'm trying to model kind of what I think, but also I wish you to self-identify. Like I can't out someone who's disabled if they don't identify that way. So it's about, so I think a lot of my experiences in New York have fed me and nourished me, and I'd love to nourish and nurture the disability artistry community in Aotearoa. I've been doing a lot of outreach to a lot of disabled people's organizations, and disability sits in a really, we have a lot of health organization and a lot of service providers, but I'd love disability and the disability community to also be in the arts community firmly, rather than in a purely service provider way. And so I think that's something that's really important. Sorry, I'm just going on tangents, but I think that's kind of what I would love to see. And I'm sorry, Delina, my brain's a little bit scattered, but and I think also one thing for COVID is my life has changed because I live in Aotearoa, but for this level 3 lockdown, my life hadn't really changed. So we only work in the office one day a week. We work from home. Like we're really flexible in the way that we work. And so I know a lot of disabled people, like there's been a lot of, I think in that initial lockdown, it was quite difficult to have all the non-disabled people be like, oh my God, I have to live in my house. Like, what am I going to do? And it's like, that's how I live my every day. Like my house is my world. It houses me in a way that maybe non-disabled people don't live. The way that I treat my body is if I'm too tired and I can't go out, then I'll stay home. Like, so I think a lot of disabled people had to experience crep time and lockdown, and having to see them have these like light bulb moments was quite difficult for a lot of disabled people. And I think that would be one of the big things that I would push for, that there's a big community that already lives in a way that's super mobile, that's super flexible, that works from home. We were having a pre-chat and someone said, like, we don't normally, this time last year, we'd never have a Zoom meeting. I've actually been using Zoom for the last 2 years. A great friend of mine who's a disabled queer Black artistic director of her own company in Boston, she has been choreographing virtually for 3 years because that's how she works. And so I think the exciting thing would be there's people that have this knowledge and that have been doing this work. And I think a big thing about COVID is you could, I think some people are thinking that they're discovering new things, I guess like Columbusing stuff, but actually there's a big community that you could reach out to and learn from. And that would be the really exciting thing if we actually shifted and changed in that way. Rant over.
Helena Keke, that was a fabulous rant. I love what you're talking about in terms of nourishing, nurturing, and outreach to helping grow the infrastructure or the ecosystem within which ways we work. But it strikes me what you said, because we heard that again from Stace from Arts Access Aotearoa, in terms of the knowledge that sits within the disabled community about working in a different way. But we don't tend to look towards the disabled community necessarily for advice and help. We're always sort of trying to go the other way around. And I think there's some amazing abilities to try to find ways to share knowledge in different ways. So perhaps I'm not quite sure what the answer is here, and maybe one of the panelists wants to kind of jump in with some suggestions about, earlier, Dione, you were talking about silos, and in terms of the institutions who we always look to as the leaders, but actually there are artists within our community and people working at community levels who have knowledge to share, but we're so busy or used to kind of looking to certain people for the leadership. Have you got any ideas about how we can change the ways in which of where we look to for leadership?
How long do you have, Delina? That might be quite a big question. I'm a graduate of the New Zealand Leadership Program, and I was one of the only Black people on the program last year. And it was a really, really interesting experience, because being on that leadership program that's led by Louise Mara and supported by Carlo Mila, who runs the Mana Moana program, it was fascinating because it brought me into very close proximity with people in institutional leadership positions. So we had people from MFAT, you had people from different federations, you had council, you had local government, central government, you had education institutions. And one of the really interesting observations that I found, and there were three creatives. There was Victor Roger, Sefa Inari, and myself. We were the three creatives on last year's Leadership Museum program, was finding how the institutions gravitated towards our insights and perspectives, was how valued creativity is within a context where everybody's on equal footing. However, I'm not sure that same equity would be displayed within institutions where the majority of people still believe in old ways of doing, because they come from existing and prehistoric in some ways of knowing. So those old ways of knowing therefore translate into old ways of doing, and they continue to perpetuate. And in order to, and I'm not going to really provide any solution, because I don't think solutions might be the easiest way, but hopefully just a starting point for a bigger discussion that people can continue to have, is that constant reevaluation of the power and the privilege that is associated with leadership, that certain people in those leadership positions take it for granted, and that other people, and I can speak for myself, coming into those conversations, when I was much younger, I found myself very curious as to why people taught the way they taught, and how they couldn't see that it was right. So it came from a very strong social justice perspective of how can you not see that you're denying a whole litany of rights in this particular moment. And as I've grown and continue to grow, I've noticed that having just one voice is never sufficient. And it's very easy to become the angry brown woman or the angry Black woman or the angry person of color. And I'm so exhausted of that. I'm equally, and this is not for everyone, and just like Keke said, I can't speak for every person's experience of Blackness or of the dreaded D word, diversity. But what I can say is that we need more of us in the room, because we need to be able to share that corridor when we wish and how we wish, because there are some days when you just do not have the emotional labor to call out people, and or it's just purely exhausting. And so I've made a very conscious choice of where I direct my energies. So in order to reach, we can say, you can't burn the master's house with the master's tools, but at the same time, there are other people who definitely believe that by being within the system, you can change the system. And I think what we need to do is have room for everyone to work in whatever purposeful way they have been called to. And so for me, at this moment in my life, Black Creators Aotearoa is the way in which I can invest and direct my energies wholeheartedly into supporting the Black community of Aotearoa. But I completely call others who are actively working within the system to change it as well. And I'm open to collaborating with the existing system, not just to dismantle it, because I don't believe dismantling it is sufficient, but we have to actually recreate an alternative. And recreating that alternative might not happen at the same site where those acts of colonial terrorism have taken place. And I know I use those words, those are quite strong words, but institutions and universities are not the traditional language and spiritual learning houses of our peoples. We did not learn in those institutions with brick walls and mortar. We learned in conversation, in Indigenous spaces. And this has always been the case for the majority of people of color and their cultures. But we've been institutionalized to value this in a different way. And I'll just close, because this is equally can become a rant as well. When I was getting my master's at VCA at the University of Melbourne about 6 years ago, we had a guest lecture. And again, it was me and another lovely Tongan woman. We were only 2 people of color in this master's cohort. And this guest lecturer said that, who's the greatest writer of all times, and I thought of Wally Shirinka, who I had the privilege to meet when I was studying at UCLA, or, Ngugi, or, all these amazing other Black writers. And he said Shakespeare and then James Joyce. And I said, no. I mean, yes, I understand, Ulysses is wonderful. But apart from that, let's actually have a conversation about the colonial ramifications of Shakespeare, And it was such a one-sided conversation. And I felt the lack of power being in a room where the majority of the students could not resonate or had never heard of these other amazing Black writers or writers of color, other Māori writers or other Pacifica writers. They were the majority white Australian, and applauded, reinforced, and relocated whiteness as the central tenet towards upholding an institution that was actually teaching us and supporting our development as artists in community and cultural development. So the system requires a lot of energy and a lot of change. So until people of color actually in those leadership positions are teaching those courses, are enabling and welcoming others to enter those courses and knowing that they have a space to be articulate and free and open, not just to what they have to say, but to what they could have to say in the future and be able to develop that voice, we really will not be able to move far. And that's when we have to lean into ourselves and really lean into deeper listening. I'll stop there.
Dolina, could I add to that leadership question?
Apologies, I just muted my microphone as the rubbish truck went past the garden. So Sarah, yes, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, look, just building on what Dione has said, in terms of, the climate change space, which intersects with all these other social and environmental justice issues that are being discussed today. Leadership is an interesting question, because clearly we need political and business leadership to move us away from our fossil fuel dependent way of making and consuming things. We also, but it's interesting, we don't need to look at some of those traditional figureheads in climate change leadership, because we're finding leadership now in many, many different areas of the community, including, for example, young people. And the movement built around Greta Thunberg, the school strikes for climate as an example, it's more tangible because it's a big movement, but there are others also happening in different scales and amongst our community. Very articulate young people who are concerned about their future and the mess, to be honest, that we're leaving for them with the way we're treating and not valuing our environment and our connection with other people and living systems. So, for example, the School Strike for Climate mobilised 170,000 people around New Zealand earlier this year, and they continue at community level every day. And it is very much about leading to people to learn more in ways that they can feel empathetic with, and then become more engaged. And it is about a self-determination journey, if you like. You can't tell people how to act, but through leadership, role modelling, being more inclusive, and then looking at the evidence, and then trying to do things that we know we can on an individual scale or in our communities or in our workspaces around changing policies and so on. All of those are really, really important. There's some really specific examples of art projects that have been connected with campaigns, if you like. 350pacific.org, the Pacific Warriors is a fabulous example. They're fighting, not drowning. And they are talking about the existential threat that the Pacific Island countries who actually produce the least emissions, but they're affected a huge amount, are bringing our attention and creating a voice around the change that has to happen worldwide. Another example was the Kermadec project that the Pew Institute supported, and that brought attention to making a marine reserve around the Kermadec Islands, led by fabulous artists like Bruce Foster and Jason Anhara and others. And that work continues, and it's engaged many people, and in spaces that are not within the walls of museums and city galleries and universities, in spaces where people really feel they can have a good conversation and talk about it in a way that affects them, and they feel empowered to do something. So from my perspective, leadership takes on many different forms now. And if we're looking just for leadership in one area, it's happening in many other spaces. And if we're more open to it, we can see it rising. And it's great to give it a platform and a voice.
Can I just add one more thing about leadership? It's important to have POC people in a leadership position, but also they need support. So like that's really important, like mentoring, or if you are Pākehā, mentor a younger brown person, because again, there's something around language. So I've asked for a mentoring stipend from my board because I acknowledge that I'm working in a new system that I don't know, and then I'll become burnt out if I'm not having that support. So I think that's also, don't just put a new brown person to lead without giving them that kind of institutional support. Yeah.
That's a great point, Polina Keke, thank you. And there's a comment that's come in from one of our viewers with regards to what you were talking about, Dione, just saying, agree with much of what you were saying. Just to note, as a Pākehā New Zealander, living as much as possible from a spiritual perspective, that I don't look for leadership from institutions, whoever is leading them. Yeah, so that again just ties in with what you were saying, Sarah, about rising leadership and leadership coming from other corners. I'd like to just wonder if each of you have got a kind of a closing thought you'd might like to share with us with regards to the idea of the call for change. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Might start with you, Sarah.
Sure. I always come back to the fact that Naomi Klein spoke about in her book, either we choose to look away or to fully turn and engage. And I think in human nature, it can feel overwhelming. And we do tend to sort of look away at times and then re-engage. I think that re-engagement, when you do so, we need to do it in ways that take care of ourselves, and maybe find ways of connecting with others, so that people, feel less isolated and alone, because we do need many millions of people taking actions to create this transformative change that's so critical for responding to the climate breakdown. And really that message that we are more powerful than we think, and the choices that we make and the actions we can take really make a big, powerful collective difference. So and the ways that people can do that can be at home, things in the community, and certainly organisations looking at their strategy and policies of how they respond to climate, treat the environment, make and distribute things. All of those practices are really critical going forward, and we need it urgently. we can't wait any longer. We need to be acting now and collectively. So, and I think the power of making your choices and actions are greater than you think. So that would be my main takeaway.
Thank you, Sarah. Dione, I'll come to you next.
Apologies, was just trying to unmute. And yes, apologies for breastfeeding in public, everyone. But you know, when the child calls, we need to respond. I guess my main takeaway would be to be responsive, to be responsive to ways of doing and knowing that might be outside our inherited systems of knowledge, and to be aware that leadership, and for me, and I often say this, that true leadership is about stepping up, but to step up, to step aside. So when we step up and we create spaces for other people to have those platforms, I feel that irrespective of their journey through there, if they are supported, and I just talked because what Sarah was saying and Kiki was saying is that if they're supported, then we are creating and building greater capacity and capability for our community. And, you know, from an economic perspective, we can call our artists and our creative stakeholders, but whatever name we choose to give them, at the end of the day, they are living beings with heartbeats and have livelihoods and families and extended relationships with their environment, with their community, with their atua, and all operating within different te ao perspectives. So if we truly can step up, it is actually showing that we can step aside and create space for other people to have those opportunities. And they might not always be immediately successful, but by giving them those opportunities, they can define their own success and create growth that will be truly valuable to them on their own terms and in their own time and to their own communities.
Kia ora, thank you. Nina Kiki, I'll come to you for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, tawhitai. Some closing thoughts. I just want to tautoko Sarah and Dione. I think they've touched on some really important points. I think one big thing that we're all saying is kind of being flexible or thinking about the structures and how we could expand them. I think a lot of organizations or people think that accessibility or disability is scary, and I just want to say that it's not, and you can totally do it. And thinking about how you can be accessible even within your like digital platforms. So having image descriptions with your images so that someone who's blind or low vision who uses a screen reader can access that imagery. Just thinking about there's a whole community out there that is engaging with the internet, and you could make the internet more accessible. And we're all going to screw up. I've made mistakes trying to be accessible. So it's just, we're all kind of learning. And I think that's important to think about. And then I think I just want to end with a little plug for Touch Compass. We are thinking about making some new works, and one of them is we would like to find a new disabled artist or chronically ill or sick, crip person to support them. So we're going to be putting out an expression of interest in the next couple of weeks. So just look out for that. Or if you are a disabled artist or someone who some of the kaupapa or the kōrero that I've talked about interests you, please reach out to us. We'd love to work with and find new community in Aotearoa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Palina Kiki, and thank you to all of you out there who've joined us today or maybe watching this later. A huge thank you to the amazing ideas that were shared by our incredible panelists this morning, Palina Kiki Brown, Dione Joseph and Sarah Meads. Do look these guys up, check out their websites, get involved, and also perhaps it would be really fantastic for you to check out the Blackout series, or for all of us to keep looking on social media and outside of ourselves for opportunities to see those rising leaders in our communities. I'd also like to thank PANNZ and Auckland Live, to thank Francis, Helena, Heather and Louise who are behind the scenes on the call with us today, and also a huge thank you to The Big Idea for their support as our media partner. This Wednesday evening, we are launching a new online series in partnership with Track Zero. It's a climate action live stream kōrero. This will run for the next 6 weeks at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday night on the Track Zero Facebook page, Auckland Live YouTube, and the PANNZ Facebook page. We would love it if you could join us. Our first panel this Wednesday is entitled Can Storytelling Ignite Change? And it includes the panelists visual artist Rachel Rakina, producer Kerry Wakia, artistic director of Te Tairāwhiti Arts Festival Tama Waipara, and climate scientist Professor James Renwick. So if you have time to check that out, I will be co-facilitating the panel with Sarah. So on a closing note today, I'll just finish our panel with a karakia. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Me karakia tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, kia tere te kai rohi rohi I mua I tō huarahi. Thanks again for joining us today. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.